This baptism theology changed also the view on women. A celibate life was regarded up to then as the respected life before God. In the monastery and staying a virgin was a direct way to heaven. All other you needed indulgence to find your way. The public marriage of previously celibate priests, monks and nuns was a theological signal. Ute Gause, professor for Reformation history, explains it was, quote, a symbolic action that wanted to make clear something elementary to the Reformation, the new face turning towards the world and the pleasures of the senses. Sometimes Lutherans have to know that again. The pleasures of the senses was a positive signal. Yeah? Actually, the Protestants in Germany are considered to be less open for sensory enjoyment. But the Reformation wanted to make it clear that living in the world is of no less value before God than living in the monastery in celibacy. And that had many consequences. For instance, midwives suddenly became custodians of the church in the parishes, because giving birth suddenly is nothing outside, unclean, but part of the life before God. And one Luther quote has to be, he could be tremendously modern in many respects. There's, for instance, the question whether grown men make themselves a laughing stock if they wash the baby's diapers. Let's hear Luther's answer. When a man goes ahead and washes diapers or performs some other mean task for his children, and someone ridicules him as an effeminate idiot, though that man is acting in Christian faith, my dear fellow, you tell me, which of the two is most keenly ridiculing the other? God, with all the angels and creatures, is smiling, not because the man is washing diapers, but because he's doing so in Christian faith. Those who sneer at him and see only the task, but not the faith, they are ridiculing God with all his creatures as the biggest fool on earth. Indeed, they are only ridiculing themselves. With all their cleverness, they are nothing but the devil's fools. That means it doesn't matter what you do, but you do it in Christian faith. That matters. And that can be a man and a woman with what we do in our life. Our life is life before God, and not any separate church life or life of faith. Daily life is life before God, and we should live it in our faith. So 2017 is an anniversary which makes clear a distinguishing feature of the Protestant Church, of the churches of the Reformation, is the theological conviction that women can be ministers and bishops. I know we have to discuss that with some of our partner churches, but okay. 6, overcoming divisions. It's the first anniversary since the Lunds Agreement of 1973. The Reformation movement was subject to division. And I think we have to ask ourselves, is it really a sign of the Church of the Reformation that it splits so easily? And I think it's a question we seriously have to discuss. The uncle of the dean of the faculty at Emory University, he has founded 3 churches. Every time he quarrels, he founds a new church. Yeah? That cannot be a sign of our church. In Europe, though, in 1973, we have sent a strong signal that such divisions can be overcome. And it showed how to do this. Despite the differences, Reformed, Lutheran and United churches in Europe, on the basis of this agreement, are able to recognize one another mutually as churches, along with their ministerial orders, and though to celebrate Eucharist with each other. Even though this fellowship of churches with different confessional backgrounds has been discredited by some as minimalist ecumenism, I think it's a model. We have a model now this time when we celebrate Reformation, how to not to be any longer divisive. That's also true with regard to the Mennonites. The Lutherans have 2010 featured an act of repentance and a plea for reconciliation, and the Mennonites are part of the preparation of the Reformation Jubilee now. So we can say that 2017 we can promote the Lunds Agreement as a living model of how to overcome division, and that's an occasion to celebrate. 7, education. It's the first anniversary to be marked in an age when the historical critical method of biblical exegesis has been widely recognized. Leaving the concepts of the Middle Ages behind him, we already talked about Bildung today. What really concerned Luther was that people should be able, every man, every woman, to confess the faith in the triune God and to affirm personally that faith. For Luther, the precondition for a mature faith was that everyone could read the Bible for themselves and was educated enough to be able not only to learn by heart the small catechism, the confession of faith for every day, so to say, but to share it, to be empowered to speak about your faith. That was the basis for education and the school for all as it developed in Germany, and its biography that leads him to that, because it was his studying of the Bible that gave him the insight for his great theological thinking. All the reformers, though, underlined the importance of education. Melanchthon, a passionate teacher and the teacher of the Germans who reformed the university system. Martin Bucer, as the teacher of the church. Zwingli learned Greek to be able to read the original text in Erasmus of Rotterdam's version. And Calvin, who took the Reformed education movement to many regions of Europe. It is still essential to the Reformation, being able to think, reflect, speculate, understand, and ask questions. And I think this is specifically important today in an age of fundamentalism. Many people say faith means don't ask, believe. No. I know fundamentalism, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, or Hindu, does not like questions, enlightenment, education. But over against this we must say, think for yourself. You can read and you are allowed to ask questions. Your conscience is subject to no one. You are not depending on dogmatic teaching, religious precepts or authorities of faith. You can believe yourself and you can read yourself. That is maybe one of the most important contributions of the Reformation. This educated, concerned faith in which all can participate. It's also a justice in education of all. And we can say that Luther today would certainly use the historically critical exegesis methods. Recently, maybe we can say that I preached in a televised service from Wittenberg, and it was a text from the letter to the Ephesians, and I said, you want to educate people, so we don't really know who wrote this letter. And then I get an email message from a young theology student. Oh, Mrs. Kässmann, I can help you. In the first verse it says, I, Paul. And I said, okay. And he was in his 8th semester, so I think he has some time. It's okay. It must be clear, it is about educated faith. And I think in 2017, that's extremely important with regard to the growing fundamentalism around the world. 8, freedom. It's the first Reformation anniversary on which in Germany, along with most nations of the Western world, there's a clear separation of church and state and a clearly declared acceptance of constitutional law, human rights and democracy. In the further development of Luther's concept of freedom has led to many of the freedoms today. And I think we should be proud of that. The freedom for Luther was, first of all, the freedom of faith and the freedom of conscience, sure. But it developed in our states into the freedom of conscience, of religion, the freedom of opinion. It's a central achievement of the Reformation that faith and reason can go alongside, and that has political consequences. After the experience of failure of the church and the ease with which it was led astray in the Nazi period, the lesson was also learned that the church must hang on to the freedom to speak out when human rights are trampled underfoot. That was the experience of the church in the German Democratic Republic, and has taught us many insight. And that is the experience many times in Argentina, in Iran. It was the experience in South Africa. A learning process that reveals, yes, church has to be political at certain points, and we talked about that in the small group before. So the Reformation anniversary 2017 must point up the political dimension of the Reformation concept of freedom. I mean, the Germans were those who had the longest to learn that they can be church in a democratic society. I said that already in the group, but reading sermons from 1914 these days, you can see how they hail the Kaiser. That's something, it's unbelievable. It took only 100 years to learn that, actually, one must say. 9, justification. We will celebrate Reformation anniversary in an achievement-oriented society. Many people of today do not immediately understand Luther's question about a gracious God, but they are worried whether their life has any purpose. What if I cannot keep up because I lost my job? What if I don't earn enough? What if I don't look good enough? The promise for life found by Luther, that God has long since endowed you and your life with significance, regardless of what you can achieve for yourself, needs a new translation in our times. Here, I thought maybe we can say you are a person of high standing because God sees you as such. Your current account for life is in the black figures, and nothing that you do can make you fail so much that your life goes into the red figures. Inner freedom is one that is not depending on what other people say about your life and how they judge it. So the Reformation anniversary 2017 has to be able to clearly articulate the discrepancies in an achievement-oriented society, and I hope that we are able to give that message to our society, where many people, I believe, need that message because they are at the edges and don't see purpose in their life. And now I can slow down. Point 10. 2017 will be the first Reformation anniversary celebrated in a global perspective. It has been really mainly German or US, 1917, not jubilees beforehand. Today we all know we live in a globalized world. But actually that was already the case in the 16th century. Anyone who closely examines the records of the imperial Diet of Worms in 1521 will realize that Luther's appearance there, while important, was by far not the only topic dealt with. I must say, I always thought, Luther was at the center of the Diet of Worms. He was not. They had many topics they had to deal with. Luther was one among others. The Emperor Charles V was striving for a reform of the empire. Belgrade had been conquered by Sultan Suleiman, and the supposed Turkish threat was high on the agenda. Securing sovereignty of the region of Spain was also an urgent matter, and especially with the eye on the colonies. Movement for social revolution had arisen in the Kingdom of Valencia. Britain, France, Italy were on the scene. And we can see that in the face of European expansion, particularly the direction of Spanish and Portuguese colonies, that was for Karl, who had been growing up in Spain, high on the agenda. Luther himself had a very restricted view of the world. Heinz Schilling writes in his new biography, quote, "The worldview of the reformer remained a continental one to his death and was rarely touched by the emerging new worlds." And yet, the Reformation was a European event which very soon took international proportions. Today, we see the international and global voices around us, and we need as churches a global voice. The chance of our church is that it exists across national, ethnic, cultural borders. We share the same Bible. We see one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. We believe that every human being is created in God's image. That has enormous ethical impact, I find. We should use it in a world of discrimination, of injustice and war.